Is taking Tylenol during pregnancy linked with the child developing autism? That was the main message of this press conference by President Trump and RFK Jr. And just because of these personalities, what is supposed to be a serious medical question becomes a game of political football, where one side will stop using the drug entirely and the other side is just gonna take it recklessly out of spite. Well, John, who is a data scientist, decided to do the third thing, to actually read the studies that this press conference was based on. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what the data actually says and answer the question, is Tylenol use during pregnancy linked to autism?
This is the press release related to the announcement that autism may be caused by acetaminophen or Tylenol or paracetamol.
Right.
It's a bit more cautious in its language because it's, I guess, trying to take into account all the evidence.
So the official press release of the government is a bit more cautious in its language than Trump/RFK announcements.
Yeah, which is expected. I mean...
And we're going to address both of these.
We are going to definitely address the studies that they reference in this press release. And I think that will address both things, really.
My understanding was that a big part of this was based on a recent, I think, meta-analysis.
Oh, okay. I know what you mean. Yeah. That's one of the ones they reference here. And it does seem like that study is... They're leaning on that study a lot for their conclusions.
Yeah.
A large part of what I will present will be talking about that study specifically and the studies that it references, and also a newer one that just wasn't in that study because it came out after.
Oh, okay. Things are moving fast in the Tylenol.
I guess so.
We should preface by saying that Tylenol is paracetamol in Europe.
It's paracetamol and also known as acetaminophen.
Right, that's the compound.
There's probably some other...
Panadol is another one, I think.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So just to quickly go through the press release, basically they just say that autism is increasing recently. It's 5 times higher than back in 2001. They do talk about this therapy called leucovorin for autism, but I'm not gonna look at that. That's beyond the scope of what I'm gonna present here.
Okay.
So basically what they're saying is acetaminophen use prenatally while the baby's in utero may cause a higher risk of the child developing autism later on. And they cite a few studies in this press release. A couple of these here, like the Nurses' Health Study 2, which was actually on HDHD. It's not on autism specifically. ADHD, yeah, sorry. And this Boston Birth Cohort, which we will talk about later, which is related to autism. It is focused on autism. They do actually note some conflicting findings, that some Scandinavian studies did not find significant associations between autism and acetaminophen use. But then they also say that some critics about this argue that it masks the true effects. So I'm going to talk about that as well.
Okay.
If you read the press release, it sounds like they're just saying, we think you should be a bit more careful with acetaminophen use during pregnancy.
It's already a lot more toned down.
Yeah, but there's always been a recommendation when you're pregnant to not use any more drugs than is absolutely necessary, of course.
Right.
It's a unique time that you don't want to introduce some compound, some supplement or drug that's not been fully studied and vetted to be safe.
Of course.
They say it's a really common medication used during pregnancy. That's because it actually is the recommended one to use for fevers during pregnancy, as opposed to like aspirin, that's got known negative effects on the child. So doctors don't recommend using that. And they say that for balancing the risks, experts emphasize a balanced approach, acknowledging potential risks of acetaminophen exposure while recognizing the dangers of untreated maternal fever and pain. So high fever is a problem for the child. If the mother has a high fever, that can affect the child. It depends on how high it is, of course, if it's a problem. And then the question is, what do you do about that high fever? And acetaminophen has been a commonly used medication to reduce the fever.
Okay. So
it's not as simple as just don't take it and you'll be fine.
Right.
It can not reducing the fever can in it of itself be a problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they talk about setting up this data science initiative to try and study this problem further.
All right.
That seems like a fine idea. I have no problem with doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we start, I just want to note some overall ideas that'll help us in our analysis. And the first and probably most important thing is that we don't have any human randomized controlled trials looking at does acetaminophen cause autism.
It would require you giving pregnant women medication that they don't need.
That they don't need and might, if that's the hypothesis, it might cause a very negative effect or a very
undesired.
I guess undesired effect. It's basically unethical, of course, because you're doing experiments on pregnant women.
So we can assume that there's not going to be one either.
No, there won't be one. Yeah, that's not going to. I don't think that'll happen. So we can only go by observational studies, looking at either prospectively, like following people throughout their lives and noting if they take acetaminophen during pregnancy, how much, and then following them to see if their children develop autism. It's that kind of thing. So not randomized, of course. So that just means that it's more difficult to determine if the association is causal.
But if the data is large enough and the association is strong enough, they could still make a case.
Yes.
Okay.
For sure, yeah. That being said, there also are not many studies on autism spectrum disorder, that's ASD, and acetaminophen. And even a review from just 2 years ago said that there's an insufficient number of comparable studies due to heterogeneity in methodology to calculate a pooled effect estimates for ASD. So just 3 years ago, they said, we can't make a meta-analysis on autism and acetaminophen because the studies are just too different.
2 years ago.
2 years ago, 2023, yeah. So let's talk about that main study, Prada 2025. So that is not a meta-analysis. It does follow some specific guidelines to try and remove bias, to try and make things standardized.
Okay.
But it is not quantitative. There's some numbers in there, but they're not like objective quantitative numbers. There's no pooled estimate like that forest plot with the diamond that you see in meta-analyses. They also say in this study that they didn't do a meta-analysis due to significant heterogeneity across the studies. So the studies are just too different. Like I said, it's qualitative, and the analysis, the conclusions are largely based on expert opinion.
Okay.
And this is the actual study, and you can see the conclusion is just our analysis using the navigation guide thus support evidence consistent with an association between acetaminophen exposure during pregnancy and increased incidence of NDDs, that's neurodevelopmental disorders. Appropriate and immediate steps should be taken to advise pregnant women to limit acetaminophen consumption to protect their offspring's neurodevelopment.
What is navigation guide?
So that's just like a specific methodology to have a standardized way to go through all the studies that they look at, to actually search for the studies and which studies to include in their analysis, and how to make a final conclusion based on those studies.
Is this something they came up with?
No, it's a separate guide to. It's basically what you would use if you can't do a meta-analysis.
Okay.
It's fine. I mean,
I was just curious.
Yeah, just specific.
Well, it does matter if they made it up or it's something that's.
Yeah, they didn't make it
practice.
up. It's just what they use to structure their research and analysis of the studies.
Okay.
There are some interesting issues with this paper, I'll say. I just want to go through a few. There are some inconsistencies in the way they report things. For example, they have many pages of tables summarizing the studies they have and the author, the location, study period, risk estimate, blah, blah, blah. And table 2 is on autism spectrum disorder. But they do some weird things where, like this study, Avella, Garcia in Spain, in risk estimate, they give it for ADHD right here. But this table is about autism spectrum disorder. And in the study, it doesn't list any odds ratios or hazard ratios for autism. It uses a different model, which is based on how symptomatic the child is, not a do they have autism or do they not. But for some reason, that's what they list in the in the table.
Okay, that doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. This next one, an incorrect reporting of Ricci 2023. So it says here, Ricci et al. Conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis to examine the association between in utero acetaminophen exposure and child neurodevelopmental outcomes. They found that prenatal acetaminophen exposure was associated with an increased risk of autism spectrum disorder, odds ratio 1.19.
Okay.
But they didn't do that. This was the meta-analysis that said there aren't enough papers and there aren't enough similar papers to do a meta-analysis on autism spectrum disorder. So this is just wrong.
What?
I'm not sure how they might have confused this with another paper, because there is another one with an odds ratio of 1.19, but they're definitely talking about that meta-analysis. So big mistake there.
Okay.
The quote from Ricci study is, only ADHD had sufficient number of comparable studies for a meta-analysis. So they didn't do one on ASD, on autism.
Out of curiosity, what were the results for ADHD?
There was some association, but it was not high.
Yeah, it's interesting because the reason I asked is to know if there's anything at all neurologically or just something happening.
Yeah, we'll see soon that some studies do report an association.
Okay.
Okay, another thing in the navigation guide, you're supposed to not use the same data set twice in your analysis. And they say in the study, to avoid duplication of evidence, we excluded studies presenting results from the same cohort or data set. And this statement is incorrect because the study here of Avella, Garcia, and this study, Liu 2016, both of those data sets and studies are analyzed in Alemany 2021, which is a meta-analysis. So they are definitely double counting these studies.
Yeah, more than one.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they needed a navigation guide to
they should have read it a bit.
Not count something twice.
Right.
Seems quite
and these are like,
rudimentary.
Yeah, I figured this out pretty soon when I started looking at these two studies individually. Like, wait, isn't that the same author that was it from this data from Alemany? And it was pretty clear. So I'm not sure how they missed that twice, but they did. So
if I was doing a study like this, and if I decided to look at a meta-analysis, I would obviously be checking whether or not I have looked at all the studies from the meta-analysis outside of the meta-analysis. I don't understand how this could happen.
I don't know.
Huh.
Okay. The other interesting thing in this table is that you remember I mentioned that Ahlqvist study, that Swedish study. So they have that on two rows here. So they have overall study and sibling control study. Why do they break out this study into two separate studies? The reason is, so their main conclusion in Ahlqvist was based on what's called a sibling control analysis. And that came to the conclusion that there was no association between acetaminophen use and autism being developed in the child. But their overall analysis before the sibling control analysis showed a small association with autism and acetaminophen use.
Okay.
So these authors in this study decided to break that out into two separate studies. One that has a small association and one that shows no association. Why they did that is that they spend a bit of time explaining why they don't like the sibling analysis, basically, and why they think that it introduces more bias than it actually controls for.
Okay.
I'll go into that a bit more when we talk about the Ahlqvist study.
Okay.
Specifically, but that's their overall reason for splitting it into two studies.
Right now, I'm sensing more bias from the authors of this study than...
Maybe. I'm trying to just lay out what I found.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Also note that expert opinion, they just don't like Ahlqvist. They list it as -1 for both. -1 for the overall study and -2 for the sibling study. So they don't like it.
Even the one that showed a small positive association. They didn't like that.
No, they don't. And they even, at the end, put a average and then an average before Ahlqvist because they just really don't like this study.
Okay.
Make of that what you will.
So without the Ahlqvist, they have a stronger case that autism
is associated with. They don't use the causal language, at least.
They don't. Okay. So it strengthens their case that Tylenol autism is associated with Tylenol. But this is still considering that they have double counted some of the studies. Couldn't we just remove the double counting from here and see what happens?
You could, but this table is really subjective. Like these numbers, they don't mean something.
Right, they're not like...
Yeah, like 2, okay, I mean, I don't know what 1.5, like, it's just coming to a conclusion, looking at this table is going to be subjective.
The reason I ask is because, like, even by their own dumb calculation, like, if it can be thrown out when you consider the double counting.
Yeah, the next team of researchers who made a study could say, let's remove those double counted studies. Let's remove the lower quality studies that were made back in 2016 because we think Ahlqvist is higher quality. And then they'll come to the conclusion that there is no association.
Okay, but just very quickly, the ones that they did double count, did they show an association or not?
They do. They do show an association. And from reading this study and going through the methodology and conclusions, I just think it doesn't add to the body of evidence in any significant way. I think it just makes it more muddy and more unclear. Yeah. I don't think it helps. There's no quantitative analysis. It's literally listed here, expert opinion score, but I don't want an expert opinion score. I want numbers that are based on the odds ratios and like pooling them. Like I don't know who these people are. Well, we will talk about that. That was one of my questions, but I'm saving it. I get the impression that they went with this weird -2 to 2 to make it seem more scientific, as opposed to it's an attempt at putting numbers
3.5 stars.
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah, yeah. They could have just put this on a 1 to 5 star thing.
Yeah,
could be. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's talk about one of the authors. Okay, so one of the lead authors is Dr. Andrea Bacciarelli. Actually, I think he's the dean of the Public Health College at Harvard. So he's not some random guy.
So this is why I saw some people mainly leaning to the right, saying it was a Harvard study.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, it was written by a guy who does work at Harvard.
Okay.
In our last podcast, we talked a lot about conflict of interest.
We did.
Okay, so I want to look at the conflict of interest statement in this study. Competing interests. Dr. Baccelli served as an expert witness for the plaintiff's legal team on matters of general causation involving acetaminophen use during pregnancy and its potential links to neurodevelopmental disorders. This involvement may be perceived as a conflict of interest regarding the information presented in this paper on acetaminophen and neurodevelopmental outcomes. Dr. Bacciarelli has made every effort to ensure that his current work, like his past work as an expert witness on this matter, was conducted with the highest standards of scientific integrity and objectivity. I don't think I've seen a conflict of interest statement like emphasizing that I'm not lying. I'm not telling lies in this paper. On my honor.
Right.
It's just, but that makes me more suspicious.
But what? Who would have a conflict of interest against going this compound, essentially?
So he was paid witness for the plaintiffs against autism, saying that the plaintiffs were suing, I think, saying that acetaminophen caused their child's autism. And he was paid, I think it was $150,000 for it. Might want to double check, but he was definitely
hold on. Who paid him?
I guess the lawyers for the plaintiff.
So wait, before this paper was written?
Before this paper was written, yes. This happened a few years ago.
Okay, so he was hired by the lawyers. Who were the lawyers presenting?
People whose children developed autism.
And the people suspected that their use of medications caused it, and the people wanted to sue the drug company, and they hired this guy. Okay.
Please
make
more sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And In his testimony in this case, Dr. Bocciarelli stated that prenatal acetaminophen exposure use can cause neurodevelopmental disorders. However, the judge threw out his testimony, saying it wasn't reliable and contained problems such as cherry-picking results, overstating findings, and showed insufficient engagement with confounding, like problems that would...
I'm surprised the judge could point that out.
have his opinion, the judge's opinion. So just a few quotes to pull out. And this is the judge giving his opinion on why they excluded or threw out Dr. Bocciarelli's testimony.
Okay.
Meaning that the jury cannot
consider it,
shouldn't look at it. Okay, the judge said, despite the identified risk of genetic confounding, Dr. Bocciarelli gives short shrift to the issue. The discussion in his reports is incomplete, unbalanced, and at times misleading. In general, Dr. Bocciarelli downplays those studies that undercut his causation thesis and emphasizes those that align with his thesis. And then that's just a note here. During his deposition, Dr. Bocciarelli repeatedly evaded defense counsel's inquiries on the issue. And a couple other quotes. Overall, Dr. Bocciarelli's testimony does not reflect a reliable application of scientific methods. Of the 3 Bradford Hill factors to which he accords the most weight, none have been analyzed in a reliable manner. Further, he chooses not to consider evidence that undercuts his opinion, namely evidence that genetic confounding may partially explain the observed associations. Because each of Dr. Bocciarelli's departures from settled and rigorous methodology favors the same outcome, it suggests a motivated, result-driven reasoning. Dr. Bocciarelli's proposed testimony regarding his Bradford Hill analysis is inadmissible under the standards set forth by Daubert rule. That's another case. And they talk about the navigation guide, which he's using in the study. And they say Dr. Bocciarelli's application of the navigation guide are similarly suspect. So,
okay.
Do I need and I actually found this after I had already gone through this study, and I was like, whoa, this is exactly what the conclusion that I came to. Okay. So here, notably, he rated Alemany 2021, a meta-analysis, as strong evidence, but did not include Ricci 2023, a more recent meta-analysis, presumably because of its inclusion that there were too few ASD studies to reliably conduct a meta-analysis. So this is stuff that we've already just talked about. So I made a table. So I extracted the strength of evidence and the expert opinion for each study, and I pulled out the odds ratios or hazard ratios from each study and sorted it by the odds ratio. And it just happens that the expert opinion and the controlled bias, they all coincide suspiciously well with the final odds ratio for each study. So the one they like the least and have the worst expert opinion on is the one that concludes that there's no association and even slightly less. That gets -2, but the one that, of course, has the highest opinion, they have the highest opinion of, is the one that has the highest odds ratio.
Despite everything you just showed me, it does look like almost every study shows slight positive association, and just one shows no or negative.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something to go on?
That's something that should definitely be considered. Yes, for sure.
Okay.
I'm just pointing out some potential issues with this paper.
Yeah.
And we'll look at some of these studies later.
And are there other studies that weren't included in this that are worth looking at?
Yes, and we will look at one.
Okay.
In the end.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. So I'll come back to the sibling analysis that he talked about, that this study talks about when we talk about the Ahlqvist study, but I first want to quickly go through a couple of these other studies. This Avella Garcia study done in 2016 was from Spain. It was on 2,644 mother-child pairs, and they looked at the use of acetaminophen. They did two types of analyses. They did you ever use it versus never use it, and then a never, sporadic, and persistent use of acetaminophen. Mm-hmm. And the outcome was not a clinical diagnosis. It was how many symptoms do you have that are related to autism.
I see.
And the main conclusion was it wasn't significant in their original analysis, though for boys it was significant, the association. However, interestingly, for girls, it was protective. There was actually a negative correlation, a negative association between.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
How many people were in this study?
2,644 mother-child pairs.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know the exact boy or girl makeup, but it's about equal.
Right.
But that was a significant decrease, so it did not cross 0.
But they're not even close.
Oh, the boy and the girl. Yeah, very different conclusions. Which is
worth looking into. Did any of the other studies? I know I'm jumping ahead, but did any of them?
Yeah, there are some that split it out by boy or girl.
We can get there.
Yeah. And they did see a dose response with that persistent use, but only in boys, which is interesting.
Right, dose response meaning that the ones that took more had more symptoms.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they had those 3 categories: never use, sporadic use, and persistent use.
Meaning persistent was more symptoms than sporadic.
It led to more association, more symptoms.
And sporadic led to more than none.
Yeah. The next study was that meta-analysis, and that's the Alemany 2021. And that did pool estimates from multiple studies, including the previous one. And it kind of did a reanalysis of some of the data. They tried to harmonize the protocol and as much as they could. This one is also not specifically on clinical diagnosis, but it's tries to approximate that in a way through some validated questionnaires, and one of the studies included was on a diagnosis, but they did come to the conclusion that results indicated that children prenatally exposed to acetaminophen were 19% more likely to subsequently have borderline or clinical ASC with that odds ratio of 1.19 and the confidence interval of 1.07 to 1.33 compared to non-exposed children. And here, boys and girls showed higher odds for ASC symptoms after prenatal exposure, though these associations were slightly stronger among boys, but not statistically different.
Interesting.
And I'll just quickly show. So focus on the top left one. A is prenatal acetaminophen exposure and ASD symptoms. And you can see each cohort, and then that's just a visualization of the odds ratio and the confidence interval. And then the overall pooled effect is that gray diamond, which does not cross the 1 or the unity line, meaning that according to this analysis, there is an association statistically with prenatal acetaminophen exposure and ASD symptoms.
Okay.
You can see that all of the studies except one actually do not cross the line, the unity line there. And the reason why the pooled estimate does not cross it is because of this one study, this DNBC, which has just a lot more cases. So the confidence interval is not as wide compared to the other studies.
Right.
Although it still is kind of wide, I would say. Just in relation to the other ones, it's not.
Okay.
So at least according to this, you can say there may be a small association. But again, we still have all of those problems with observational studies. Is there some other factor that's influencing this? And of course, in each of these studies, you try to control for those factors, but you, of course, can't control for everything.
Right.
It's impossible. G 2019. This is that Boston birth cohort study. This was an interesting study because it's not just looking at did you use acetaminophen while you were pregnant. It actually tried to measure metabolites of acetaminophen in the umbilical cord when the child is when the mother is given birth to the child. Then they test the blood in the umbilical cord. Did it contain metabolites of acetaminophen? And then they follow up later to see if the child develops autism.
Huh.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah.
It's interesting. And this was one of the ones that they mentioned in the HHS press release in the fact sheet. And also in the Prada study, they have this in there as well. This was the study that they liked the most.
Right.
And had a higher odds ratio, which I'll show. So this was on 996 mother-infant pairs, and they measured 3 different acetaminophen biomarkers, unchanged acetaminophen, no metabolites, just acetaminophen directly, and then I guess two metabolites of acetaminophen. They interestingly found that this unchanged acetaminophen was detectable in all of the samples, in 100% of them, which sounds strange to me. It's unclear exactly why this happened.
Okay.
But it gives some, I guess, limitations on the full, like having a proper no exposure versus exposure analysis.
Uh-huh.
I'll show you how they did it, but it would have been nicer if they had a group that was, had no detectable acetaminophen, but that didn't happen.
How can that be?
Yeah, it's unclear, and it'll be even more clear when I explain a bit more about the study, so just hold on.
Okay.
The outcome was a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, so that's good. And what they did was they compared the lowest tertile of cord acetaminophen burden to the second and third tertile. So they divided the acetaminophen amount into 3 different buckets based on just how the numbers played out. No preset cutoffs or anything, just how they just looked at the data and divided it into 3 buckets.
Okay.
And the outcome from the lowest versus the third, the odds ratio was 3.62, confidence interval from 1.62 to 8.62. So it's pretty large confidence interval. And that's comparing the lowest tertile, the lowest group, to the highest group. And the conclusion was cord biomarkers of fetal exposure to acetaminophen were associated with significantly increased risk of childhood ADHD and ASD in a dose-response fashion. So this one makes you think, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
Maybe there's something there.
Sure.
Because they're actually measuring something. They're not, Yeah. You can make the case that the other studies where they just ask the mothers or ask whoever is, who's ever the medical practitioner monitoring the mothers, did they use acetaminophen? You can make the case that that's very imprecise.
Sure.
And you would hope that this would be a way to fix that,
But the way this started was already not very confidence inspiring.
Not ideal.
Yeah.
I want to go through some critiques and then some some strengths of the study.
Okay.
One thing is that this blood measure is just a one-time measure at birth. One test. And associating that with an autism diagnosis, 5-10 years down the line, there may be something there, but it also feels just a bit strange that you take a blood test one time, and that's the measure that would lead to a autism diagnosis.
Why is that stranger than asking them if they took the medication.
Yeah, it may not be, but you can at least ask them how often.
Gotcha. See, I didn't know they took it at birth.
Right, it's just at birth.
Is it possible that the reason it showed up in all of the samples is because they give it to women when they're giving birth?
It's possible that there's some drug that was given. As far as I could get from reading the study, that isn't like a set procedure that they do.
Okay.
Like anybody who comes in to give birth, here's some Tylenol.
Right.
Like that's not.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so I don't know. I could not figure out a clear answer to that question, why there's 100%.
It just seems really weird to not address that in any way.
They did address it. They acknowledged it and addressed that it was a not ideal situation, and that's why they had to do this tertile grouping. But
if I had seen that, like if I was conducting the study and I had seen it, I'd be like, there's something wrong.
Yeah, but there may not be. It just, I don't know. It's hard. Yeah, something's happening. I'm not sure why. I don't think they're sure why, but this is the study we got.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing is that acetaminophen is metabolized pretty quickly, at least by the mother. So it only at most should last like 24 hours in the blood. And I think the half-life is 3 or 4 hours. So after a day, it's mostly all gone. 2 days, it's like totally out of your system. That's again why I'm talking about that exposure window. It's like this one-time thing that could only measure acetaminophen use in the last day before birth.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the dose response is questionable because the second tertile, the mid one, that odds ratio crossed 1. We know that the tertiles are statistically different, but we don't know what that means. Like, we don't know if the first one took 1 pill and the second one took 10 pills or 2 pills, like, and the third one took, you just don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Practically. The next point is, for some reason, they didn't measure one of the main metabolites of acetaminophen and came up with this exposure index that it's kind of a combination of these 3 different metabolites, 3 different acetaminophen biomarkers that they measured. So it's partially imputed. So it's just not as precise of a measure that you'd want.
Right.
Actually, one of the metabolites showed no association with ASD when they only looked at that metabolite. So there's some inconsistencies going on here, I'll say.
Yeah.
And the confidence intervals are very wide. So it's, I'd say, a statistically fragile result. There's a bias that can come from this kind of study where if your child looks like it's developing a developmental disorder, you're more likely to stay in the medical system.
Okay.
And that could lead to just a higher rate of diagnosis that could kind of bias the result.
How?
If a significant amount dropped out of the, of the population here.
Okay.
The autism rate was much higher than in the general population. They kind of did this purposefully because they wanted more numbers, more data, basically. But that just means it can kind of limit the generalizability and could lead to this selection bias in there.
Right.
However, there are strengths in this study.
Okay.
We do have objective blood biomarkers.
I'm not convinced of that one here.
Ideally.
Sure. The idea is there.
if this association is true, it is a strong one. So it's not like 1.05 or something that's like, you're like, like if it was actually 3.6 times, then yeah, that is something for sure. It looks like it might be dose response, but again, yeah, that's unclear. And there is evidence that acetaminophen does cross into the child through the blood that is probable. So it's theoretically possible that even a one-time use could lead to developmental disorder. Acetaminophen metabolites were detected in the umbilical cord blood, even if it wasn't detected in the mother, meaning that the mother processed it already, but maybe the child could not because it's still in the umbilical cord. And the assumption is that the child is less able to process acetaminophen.
Okay, I can see that.
That could make sense. They, of course, did some sensitivity analysis and did come up with similar results, looking at different ways to reduce bias or reduce confounding. They did adjust for major confounders.
How many people were in this study?
996 mother-infant pairs.
Okay, and I just want to repeat one more time.
Yeah.
That 996 of the mothers had in the umbilical cord traces of...
Yes, acetaminophen.
And acetaminophen can last in the body a few hours.
Yeah, like a day max.
Let's say a day.
Yeah.
Upon giving birth, a measurement was taken from the umbilical cord, and all 996 umbilical cords showed traces of acetaminophen. Correct.
I don't know.
Don't you think it can be a mistake?
It could be, but I can't. I can't go back and check their work or something.
Fine. Just wanted to have it on the record.
Yeah, they mention it. They're aware of it.
If I was conducting this study, I would try to explain it, not just mention it. I would try to maybe even go out of my way to go and ask some of the mothers.
Yeah, did you really use it? Yeah.
Because I think their device that takes the measurement was inaccurate or something like that.
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they deeply analyze why it's in 100%.
All right.
They just kind of stated that's the way it is and say it could have biased the results, but
sure.
Okay. Now we're on the famous Ahlqvist 2024 study, the one they don't like.
Been looking forward to this one.
So I'm going to first go through why that Prada study, the one with Dr. Bacciarelli, why they don't like sibling analysis.
Right.
Because the Ahlqvist study, the main conclusion is based on the sibling analysis. But first, what the sibling analysis does is basically compares siblings where one pregnancy used acetaminophen and the other didn't, in the same family, of course, siblings. And this basically controls for shared confounding, familial confounding, like genetics or some stable family environment, socioeconomic factors, without having to actually specifically measure it. And if they have other data in the study, like it's a single child, they do remove that from the analysis.
That makes sense.
So I'm just going to go through Prada's key critiques.
Okay.
So just summarize them. And they say that there's non-shared confounding. So the pregnancy specific factors can still bias those within pair estimates. That could mean that within the family, each pregnancy is different. So there might be some factor that they don't take into account that would could still bias the result.
Okay.
And they also claim that if there's underreporting of use, it will tend to push the result towards no effect, especially in sibling analyses.
Is that true?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And they do state that there's a loss of statistical power when you remove data, which is, you can't argue with that generally, as a general statement, unless you throw out crap data, of course.
Sure.
And they also say that birth order effects can have an impact. So if there's an impact of taking acetaminophen or developing autism, if the order of birth matters, that can also skew the results.
Okay.
And the sibling analysis doesn't specifically deal with that, is their one of their critiques. And they basically say that if you control for all the shared family factors, you can erase part of a real effect. And then the question is, are these valid critiques of a sibling analysis? And these are, yes, general, well-known limitations of sibling designs. It's not like these guys are the first ones to have these critiques. They're well-known, but does that mean we should just throw out the sibling analysis? Of course not. It's very important, and it should be integrated into the full body of evidence, of course. And there are ways to test a lot of these issues. You can do stress tests and sensitivity analyses to make sure a lot of the issues they bring up don't affect the result. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the study specifically. So this study is a Swedish study based on 2,480,797 children born between 1995 and 2019 in Sweden. Wow. A lot of children. And they looked at the use of acetaminophen during pregnancy, prospectively recorded from antenatal and prescription records. So this is also using prescription records because in Sweden, apparently, you can be prescribed acetaminophen. It's not just over the counter. Interesting. And the outcome was on the clinical diagnosis of autism. And the sibling analysis was on 94,105 siblings. So good numbers. Right. For sure. Much more than the previous studies we were looking at. And their conclusion, this is the overall conclusion of the study, was acetaminophen use during pregnancy was not associated with children's risk of autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability in sibling control analysis. This suggests that associations observed in other models may have been attributable to familial confounding. What does familial confounding mean? Right. So that means that there's some background factor that runs in families, like genes or some long-term health, stress, parenting practice, that would have to affect the mother's likelihood to take acetaminophen and also the child's chance of being diagnosed with autism. I was thinking that earlier when... Yeah, and one example is if the mother just has a tendency to have fevers and migraines or something, and she more often uses acetaminophen, and for some reason that risk profile of the mother increases the child's risk of developing autism. If you look at it, another family that doesn't use acetaminophen, but also doesn't have those other risk factors, possibly genetic or something, or the mother just doesn't get fevers or migraine, and also doesn't use acetaminophen, and the child then therefore has a lower risk to develop autism, not because of acetaminophen, but because of the other risk factors. If you just analyzed it based on not a sibling family analysis, you would come to the conclusion that it looks like increased use of acetaminophen leads to a higher risk of autism?
Certain factors cause mothers to either have fevers or migraines, basically things that would drive them into taking acetaminophen.
Mm-hmm.
And those factors may be associated with the child having autism later on.
Mm-hmm.
But without looking at those factors, you can just simply look at mothers who took acetaminophen and conclude that it is the drug that is causing or is linked to autism.
Yeah. And that's the familial confounding.
Mm.
And the sibling analysis deals with that problem, that confounding.
It helps with it, but situation could have changed for the family from one child to the other.
Yeah, the situation can change, but there are ways to test that in the data, at least somewhat.
How? Like, I'm thinking if the family is having financial struggles by the time the second child comes.
I would hope that wouldn't be associated with autism, but I know what you mean.
No, but it could be a cause.
If you did measure that, you can include that as a confounding variable.
Right, but model. That's not what they did.
They did adjust for other factors than just sibling. They didn't just throw it in the sibling model and not adjust anything else.
Okay.
So, and there are ways to, like, for example, to test if the birth order has an effect.
Right.
There are analyses to test that.
Sure.
That you can do. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Their overall non-sibling control analysis did have a hazard ratio of 1.05, and the confidence interval was above 1, so it is significant. However, the sibling control model had a hazard ratio of 0.98, and it did cross 1, so it's not significant. No association.
Okay.
One interesting thing from this study was that in the sibling analysis, you also do not see a dose response in how much acetaminophen is used by the mother. So you see similar results for the sibling analysis. And for model 3, which is controlling for some specific factors, you also do not see a clear dose response. You see a tiny, you see like a possible one, but only in the medium dose, which leads me to think that there may not be one since you don't see one in the high dose.
Yeah.
You see, yeah, so, but it is close. I don't know. And those doses, like that's per day. I think that's pretty high. 430 milligrams per day. That's like taking one acetaminophen every day.
Right.
Throughout the pregnancy. That
is really high.
Seems to be a lot to me.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. And they state that sibling control analysis did not identify a dose-response association between acetaminophen and neurodevelopmental disorders. So not just autism, but the other ones as well.
Right.
And then regarding specifically the critiques of Prada on this Ahlqvist study, one of their critiques was that in the Ahlqvist study, they saw a very low acetaminophen use of about, I think, 7.5%. And Prada said that was too low because they had other studies that said it was like 40 to 50%. But Ahlqvist said that that's plausible because in Sweden, they recommend to stop any drug use basically during pregnancy, especially, pain relievers and such.
Okay.
Unless your doctor says it's okay.
And yet the high dose was really high.
Right, but that was, within that 7.5.
Sure.
7.5%, then some people are taking it more, I guess. So Prada said that they may have misclassified acetaminophen use because there was such a low rate compared to some other studies that they mentioned.
Okay.
And that that might explain the no association result. But Ahlqvist did some simulation analyses that led them to conclude that it would not affect the result.
Okay.
It's not a perfect refutation, but they're at least testing the data to show that.
Is Ahlqvist doing these in response to Prada, or they've done that ahead of?
Yeah, there's a supplement to the main Ahlqvist study that is long and detailed and goes through a lot of these critiques already.
Ahlqvist looks like a solid study.
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts on it right after, at the end of this. Okay. Prada also suggested that the sibling subset may be, somehow different from the main analysis, everyone in the main analysis for some reason, that if you only look at siblings, they're somehow different from looking at a single child, and that's biasing the results somehow. But Ahlqvist says, no, the sibling subset is representative of the overall result. And they ran the standard non-sibling model within only the sibling eligible cohort, and it gave the same result, the same pattern as the full group, as the full cohort. So there's nothing different about just the siblings as far as the associations.
Do you find it interesting that Ahlqvist has a preemptively prepared response to all the criticisms that...
It's because these criticisms are just general criticisms that are in the literature about sibling analyses. And if you're doing a proper study and you're doing it with sibling analysis, you would test these things.
Okay. But did Prada not read the supplementary?
I don't know. It's entirely possible that they just didn't read it, or they just don't like sibling analyses and just put out the general critiques.
I find Prada is very good at picking apart studies that he doesn't like.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. You could say that, yeah. Okay. And one of the critiques that even you brought up was that the birth order could influence the result, but they checked that. They did sequence checks in discordant pairs, and they showed no difference between the results when they looked at this or that order of the siblings. So they did tests on this, this exact issue, and found no difference between whatever order the autism diagnosis was versus not. Overall, the study has extensive confounder control. Then they also have the sibling model as well to help deal with confounding that you can't measure in a family.
Okay.
And then in the end, Ahlqvist concludes that with all of these checks, that there's no causal link between autism and acetaminophen use. And one thing that really stuck out in Prada's criticism was that they state that magnified bias in sibling control comparisons can be attributed to the fact that only sibling pairs discordant on exposure and outcome contribute to within-pair associations. So what does that mean?
You tell me.
So they're saying that bias is magnified in sibling control because you're looking at sibling pairs where the exposure and the outcome are different, so that there's one sibling that has the exposure of acetaminophen who doesn't develop autism, and that other sibling then has to have no exposure to acetaminophen and no autism. So they have to be different in both acetaminophen use and autism diagnosis, which would bias the results, definitely. It's a bit hard to wrap your head around, I know. Does that make sense, though?
No, I don't understand how only cases where both the outcome and exposure are different.
This is why.
Oh.
That's not what happened in the Ahlqvist study.
Oh.
The Ahlqvist study, their analysis is based only on exposure discordance. So if acetaminophen use is different in the family, if one sibling, the mother uses acetaminophen, and one sibling, the mother doesn't, not the outcome. They don't take into account the outcome in selecting the siblings to analyze.
Okay, yeah, because why would they?
There are some specific cases in other types of analysis, in other types of sibling analyses where you would do that, but not in the way that Ahlqvist does it.
Okay.
They just didn't do it this way. And it's totally clear that they didn't do it that way. It literally states that in the study multiple times in the methodology that they don't condition on the outcome discordance in the siblings. It's only on the exposure. This is a general critique of sibling analyses that could introduce bias, but that's not what Ahlqvist did in their study. But Prada doesn't mention that. So the Prada statement is true for a specific kind of sibling analysis, which is called a conditional fixed effects logistic regression, only for binary outcomes or matched case analyses, but that's not the analysis that Ahlqvist did. And Prada mentions 3 sibling-controlled studies which require special consideration. None of them do it this way.
Okay.
All right. So the final study we're going to talk about is the recent one that was just published in September. And it's also interesting study that also includes sibling analysis.
Oh.
And this one is Okubo 2025, published September 2nd. This was a Japanese study. So now we're talking about a very different population.
Yeah.
You know, very different culture, behaviors, food.
Do they even, do these cultures, I don't mean the Japanese, but I mean the Japanese, Swedish, the US, wherever these studies are being conducted, diagnose autism?
The same criteria?
Yeah.
As far as I know, it's pretty much the same.
Oh, okay.
There might be some small differences.
Okay.
In certain countries, but I think it's relatively the same clinical diagnosis. So this study in Japan on 217,602 children born between 2005 and 2022. The primary analysis was actually what's called a propensity score matched analysis, but they also did a sibling analysis. And this propensity score matched analysis resulted in a hazard ratio of 1.06, but with a confidence interval from 0.98 to 1.15.
Okay.
So not statistically associated and pretty small, even if it is something, but it statistically at least is not a significant association.
Yeah.
Their conclusion was, although propensity score matched analyses indicated a small increase in risk, that's the 1.06, sensitivity analyses suggested that unmeasured confounding, misclassification, and other biases may partially explain these associations. A propensity score is basically a way to make the unexposed and exposed groups comparable on whatever factors you measure. So you would create a single number. It's kind of a dimensionality reduction of all those factors. And then you would match children from the exposed group to the unexposed group. And you would compare those together. Mm-hmm. You would match people, one who was exposed to acetaminophen and one who was not. You would match them on all factors possible to get a better comparison with less bias. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then you look at the percent of autism in one group versus the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if people are unmatched, they just drop them from the data set. And so that should balance out all the measured covariates or factors. So the differences in the outcome, the autism diagnosis, are less likely just due to those different factors that we measure. And so they had a crude, which is unadjusted for any factors and not the propensity score. This is just crude, raw associations. That did see a slight increase. So an HR for association with autism spectrum disorder of 1.16, and it was significant. But then in this propensity score matched analysis, it was not significant. It was the confidence interval crosses 1, so statistically not significant, not associated. And in the sibling comparison, actually significantly reduced that hazard ratio to 0.85, 0.848.
So a negative?
Yes, but it did cross 1.
Sure, but it's also the average isn't.
Yeah, it went down quite a bit. Yeah. But it still would be statistically non-associated.
I get it.
Yeah, just being...
But I mean, it's the average is far away enough from the one that's kind of giving me a little more confidence here than the 0.98.
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, 1.056.
Yeah, right, yeah. Right, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah. Because 1.06 is still a bit above, but 0.84
it's like barely
is
above,
much
yeah,
below.
exactly.
Yeah. So it does look like when they control the confounding variables better, it reduces the effect a lot and even reverses it potentially.
Right.
And also, if you have tougher autism spectrum definitions and misclassification modeling, that seemed to weaken the association. Let's show some charts.
Charts.
Okay. So this is from the supplemental analysis in Okubo. You'll see 2 charts. You'll see an unadjusted incidence of the offspring's neurodevelopment outcomes. So this is not just autism. This is any neurodevelopment disorder, including ADHD and autism as well, and intellectual disability with maternal acetaminophen use. So the kind of orange line here is cumulative incidence. So that's every user of acetaminophen, and the dark blue is non-user. Mm-hmm. So the incidences of any of these developmental disorders and years after birth. So, it just keeps going up as the children get older.
Right.
And you can see that in the unadjusted analysis, it does appear that the users of acetaminophen does increase the incidence of a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Yeah.
Okay, but now if we look at the sibling comparison, the lines switched.
Right.
So every user is actually now below the non-user of acetaminophen.
And they are much closer to each other.
And they are closer, yeah. But the trend is protective.
Sure.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
And this is on all neurodevelopmental disorders. So, also interesting.
Yes. Because you would want to know that.
Yeah, of course. Now, so you want to do a meta-analysis?
Sure.
Okay. So all of the studies we talked about...
Can we get this published?
I don't want to.
Why not?
Let's say this is what you would do to do a meta-analysis. Uh-huh. You would do more background research and blah, 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 but...
I don't know if the other guy did that.
Well, that one wasn't a meta-analysis technically.
So can we do that?
Sure. I mean, yes. Okay. You could write this up and try to get it published, but
wait, we should give our expert opinion on how much we
put a 5 on our study. Okay. And I will state that these studies are not all the same. Sometimes it's not a specific clinical autism diagnosis. Sometimes the exposure is not exactly the same in each study, but ignoring all those problems, this is what you would get if you combined all of them into one meta-analysis.
Yeah.
I included, so that one Avella Garcia study that's not here because it's in this Alemany 2021 as the INMA study. That's that data set.
Yeah.
And I have that Liu 2016 study separately here. I used the original data from that study instead of the one from the meta-analysis.
Okay.
And I do have that G 2020 study that measured the blood cord levels of acetaminophen. So this is taking all of the studies we looked at, but I've also split out the Ahlqvist and Okubo separately in their overall population and sibling analysis, and the propensity score matched and sibling analysis. So we have considering them as separate studies.
Wouldn't that be like double counting?
In a way, yes. Which is why I got another one to show you that is without that. And you can see that like the Ahlqvist, that confidence interval was pretty small, and that's why it has the highest weight in the meta-analysis right here. And you can see the widest ones here receive very small weights. Like
that makes sense.
Two. And G is that one, the cord blood marker one, is a very small weight because the confidence interval was so wide. But I'd argue that that study shouldn't even be in this meta-analysis because it's a very different kind of study.
Yeah.
And so if you take all of these as I have it, the result is a non-significant association between maternal acetaminophen use and autism. Odds ratio pooled estimate of 1.06, but it passes the 1 unity line. If we only look at diagnosis, the ones that are specifically the outcome is on a clinical diagnosis of autism, then we get a similar result that it's just slightly above 1, but not significant because the confidence interval crosses 1.
Okay.
And then if I kind of do a bit of my own expert opinion and pull out the studies that I think we can kind of compare, and also that I removed the double counting of the splitting the Ahlqvist into two studies and Okubo as well. We get a similar result that there's a slightly just 1.06 estimate of the odds ratio, but it still crosses the 1, so it's statistically not significant. And you can see those two at the bottom would be the sibling analyses that show less than 1.
Something about pooling sibling analyses with the others is throwing me off.
Because it's different?
Yeah, in a way, it feels like it's more robust. Like they belong in a category of their own. I
guess that is an argument you could make, but you could also make the argument that they could be included in a meta-analysis because your exposure, the acetaminophen, and your outcome is the same. And if you measure it similarly in all the studies, even though your analysis is slightly different, like all of them as somewhat different models, like the confounders that they control for is slightly different in each study. Like it's never going to be exactly the same analysis is what I'm saying.
Then I think you should have picked the non-sibling versions of both.
But in my view, it's stronger to use the sibling analysis from that data set. So if I have to choose one of them, I think I would choose the sibling analysis from those studies.
Yeah, I see that. It's certainly the one that I would be more inclined to believe. I'm just saying that because it's no longer apples to apples comparison.
I'd argue that it is almost apples to apples. That it's apples to apples enough.
Okay.
No study is exactly the same. So, and I would argue that it's only the way it's just like the model's a bit different. The way they control for confounding is different.
Okay, let me ask this. Why do you prefer it?
Because I think it removes more bias and controls for the bias better than just the overall analysis.
Okay, fair enough.
It makes more sense to me that it's a more robust way to analyze the associations.
Yeah.
I don't think that the critique from that Prada study is relevant for these two studies.
Fair enough.
Actually, I should have mentioned the Okubo study also does a lot of sensitivity analyses and stress tests of their data in the supplement, and they find similar conclusions. Like they still find no association between the autism and acetaminophen. Okay. Just to close out some obvious things, I guess, but maybe that need to be said. That is acetaminophen safe? It depends. It can be toxic. You can overdose on it, and the threshold is really not that high.
Okay.
It can basically shut your liver down if you take too much. And even 4 grams of it in one day can be problematic.
4 grams is a lot, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's like...
It's not unattainable.
No, because like one pill, extra strength, I think, is 500 milligrams.
Right.
So, it's not like you need to take 100 pills.
No. 10 can do.
Yeah. And if you take it regularly, lower dose even, that can cause some problems. Interestingly, N-acetylcysteine is basically the antidote to overdosing in acetaminophen. So
that is interesting.
And that's usually what you get if you go to the hospital and you're for an overdose on acetaminophen. Yeah. So if you accidentally take too much, take some NAC. Obviously, any medication used in pregnancy should be clinician, doctor guided, and limited as much as possible to what's medically necessary. Generally, NSAIDs, that's the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, are not recommended in pregnancy, especially in 3rd trimester. Acetaminophen is not an NSAID, and that's why it's typically recommended to be used for fever reduction if you need to. But of course, if you need to, and under medical supervision, fevers can harm the fetus, of course. Okay. Shall we go conclusion?
Okay.
All right. Is prenatal acetaminophen use associated with autism spectrum disorder? So I will say that in my analysis, I think that the stronger and more well-controlled studies say that there is no association between the two. And that the earlier studies, they did suggest a small association, but I think that's just due to some confounding that they couldn't control for in those studies. And it wasn't that large in the first place. However, you see that often in these larger observational studies, that you'll see like a small association, and then later when they do more and more studies, more sophisticated analyses, that the initial association reduces by a lot. And I think that's what's happening here, that they just found an association because there were some factors that they just couldn't control for at the time with their data sets. And I think for reasonable use of acetaminophen, the best evidence that we have is that there's no association between using acetaminophen and the child developing autism. Of course, if it's unreasonable use, then I don't know, you shouldn't do that anyway.
Yeah.
And of course, talk to your doctor. So in the end, statistically, the higher quality evidence shows no association between prenatal acetaminophen use and autism. That's my conclusion, based on my opinion and looking at the data.
Okay.
Thoughts, questions?
What's your take on both sibling studies showing negative association?
Maybe there is something to the fever then developing autism, and that if you use acetaminophen to reduce a fever, there is some protective effect. That's just a guess.
Makes sense.
I can't come up with a different explanation, but I also don't know everything about developing
I get it.
autism. Yeah.
The study that the government is heavily relying on wasn't done by the government. It was done by this one guy mainly.
The Prada study?
Yeah.
It was written by
Okay.
these 4 researchers. So it's not just written by Bacciarelli. However, I would assume that a lot of it comes from him because that is what he based his testimony on, this navigation guide, and that was done prior to this study being published.
Okay, so he did a study that he took to court, and then he made this study, which, by the looks of it, has similar flaws as the one he took to court.
It definitely has some similar flaws, but it sounds like the analysis he did in the court testimony was even stronger in its language on causality. And here they toned that down.
Gotcha. And just to reiterate, it was thrown out of court.
Yes. One thing I should have mentioned about this study and the Ahlqvist study. The Ahlqvist study was published in a journal called JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it's one of the top journals of all of them.
Okay.
One of the most respected. And the Prada study was published in a journal called Environmental Health, and I'm not familiar with it, but it's definitely not one of the top journals, I'll say.
I mean, ever since we established that the journals do not much curation, I don't know.
Depends on the journal.
I care about.
Okay, the Ahlqvist study, you can see, if you read the study, you can tell it's higher quality.
I mean, I got that impression just from what we went over.
Yeah, and especially you go through the supplemental information, it's like a lot of stuff in there.
Okay. It starts from like how this information spreads. From the president and RFK giving their talk. But the underlying thing that they've based it on is the page that we started with. And the page relies heavily on a study that we went over extensively here.
Yeah, it's unclear which study they rely on most.
I mean, I'm assuming if the government puts out an announcement like that, there should be some checks and balances in place to uncover what you uncovered in 2 weeks. And while it's true that the official announcement was more cautious in its language than the president or RFK, this is still going to cause some issues, let's say.
Yes, of course. It's hard to talk about this without getting political, but it's clear that the announcement is very light on the evidence and just like links to studies that this one that we've been talking about, Prada, and that other one, G, the Boston birth cohort. They linked those 2 studies, and then they linked the Ahlqvist study, the Swedish study, as conflicting evidence.
Right.
At least they did that, but of course that doesn't get mentioned in their, when they actually do the press conference, RFK and Trump.
I think 95% of people aren't even going to go read the announcement page.
No, of course
they're going to be like, Trump said it, so I'm going to stop taking Tylenol forever. And some other people are going to be like, Trump said it, so I'm going to keep taking like more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, those are both the wrong responses.
Sure. And we'll let people decide which one is more wrong, because
yeah, I went into this really with I was not sure.
same. I had no idea.
Yeah, I had not heard of this link before. There is more research in animal models that we didn't talk about, which is also some evidence for it, some evidence against it. Like
animals with autism.
That's one issue with the animal models, that like you can't diagnose them.
All right.
They try to measure, if there's some problem with the development of the animals.
No, but I was perfectly prepared for you to. I wasn't expecting you to be, but I was prepared for you that you might be like, actually, there might be something here. Maybe he's exaggerating it, but more research needed or whatever.
Yeah, I was going into it. There were times where I was like, maybe there is really something here as I was reading some of the studies. But really digging into the Ahlqvist study, I think that's the one that convinced me. And then I found the Japanese study, which had the same, and just came out, and it had the same results as the Ahlqvist study. And that just solidified, I guess, my concern that there was something, I don't know, particular to the sibling analysis in Ahlqvist that they didn't do correctly or something. But with the Japanese study, in both their methods, they found no association. And they've even found some potential indication of protective effects.
Right.
Yeah. It was an interesting journey.
Cool. Yeah.
What else can we say?
Not much without getting political.
Yeah.
Okay, off the record.
Wait, off the record.